A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support. It was the kind of day that drags, one of those afternoons where the sun seems to hang just a little too long in the sky, every tick of the clock echoing through the quiet of my small therapy office, where I usually found solace among my books and wobbly old chairs. After a morning filled with mundane cases, anxiety, a sprinkle of depression, the usual suspects, my final appointment came in the form of a new patient who, unknown to me at the time, would shake the very foundation of my moral compass. When he walked in, I wasn't prepared for the weight of his presence. He was stooped but imposing, a heaviness about him that seemed to suppress the air. He introduced himself as Victor, and I could tell from his accent that he was not from around here. I later learned he was from a war-torn country far removed from my well-insulated suburban existence. At first glance, he appeared like any patient, but there was something in his eyes that spoke of nightmares and shadows. He sat in the chair across from me, those haunted eyes narrowing even further when I caught a glimpse of the scars, physical and otherwise, etched into his skin. "You have to promise not to judge," he said, a quiver in his voice revealing a hint of vulnerability. "I'm not who you think I am." It was an invitation and a warning, as if reality were temporarily suspended, and I found myself leaning forward, curious. As the session unfolded, Victor let slip snippets of his life, recounting tales of violence and chaos that would make a horror movie pale in comparison. He spoke of choices, of battles fought not only against enemies but against his own conscience, and I was struck by the absurdity of it all. I was confiding in a war criminal, a man culpable of atrocities I read about in history books. The ethical dilemma weighed heavily on me. What constitutes a person? Should I extend him the compassion I offered all my patients, or could he be irredeemable? As the weeks dragged on, I grew attached to Victor in ways I never anticipated. Each session grew increasingly intimate, laden with discussions of guilt, human nature, and the cyclical nature of violence. He was both a monster and a man seeking redemption. I began to find beauty in his tragic story, bewildered by how he reflected my own fears back at me. Maybe I wasn't just a therapist healing others but a fragile human being grasping for connection in a world teeming with horror. But one fateful afternoon, everything shifted. As he spoke of his past, of time spent wondering whose lives he had claimed in the name of war, a phone call interrupted our session. I instinctively picked up, only to hear a voice crackling on the other end. "We know who he is. He's a wanted man." My heart stammered. The confrontation of my unspoken fears had arrived at my doorstep. Shame surged through me for even allowing myself to feel sympathy for him. The line between right and wrong blurred starkly in that moment, and I widely opened my eyes, desperately searching for some illumination within Victor's steady gaze. "Do you know what you're doing?" I asked him, an accusatory whisper escaping my lips. To my shock, he smiled softly, an expression of understanding and serene acceptance. "I'm trying to come home," he replied, words heavy with implication. In that moment, I realized I had not just been his therapist but a kindred spirit. We sat in silence, a suffocating tension enveloping us as I battled with my professional duty against an unsettling sense of betrayal by my own empathy. When the session ended, my heart remained heavy, complicated, and confused. I didn't actually care. Who had he been before? The person who sat across from me was alive, vulnerable, and paradoxically engrossing. The lines we often draw based on societal norms began to dissolve like sugar in warm water, leaving me disoriented yet intrigued, just wishing for clarity that never arrived. Weeks passed, and I knew I was facing a crossroads. I had to decide, continue treating him and risk my own conscience, or sever ties altogether, never allowing the flicker of his humanity to shimmer in my mind again. In the end, I chose to continue our sessions, not because I believed he deserved forgiveness, but because, admittedly, I reveled in the complexity of his existence. I was learning about the human condition in its rawest form. The Psychiatric Association's guidelines, the law, my own moral compass, they all paled against the tapestry of human life I was slowly unraveling. I had not abandoned my ethics but instead had discovered a deeper narrative woven into Victor's story, one that transcended mere black and white thinking. I drifted further into this uncharted territory, committing myself to this man's journey toward redemption, even if it meant grappling with my own shadows along the way. For now, we would wade through the murky waters together, pieces of history intertwined, until clarity illuminated the darkness, if it ever would. Months later, I still found myself reflecting on that initial encounter, how I'd crossed paths with a war criminal who, while undeniably flawed, taught me a profound lesson in humanity. In the end, perhaps without the spark of madness that ignited this unlikely connection, healing could not have truly begun. As I continued my therapy practice, I found comfort in knowing that sometimes understanding rises from the ashes of the past, and the courage to face those shadows becomes a beautiful journey all on its own. As the months continued to unfold, I settled back into the rhythm of my therapy practice, letting the echoes of that initial encounter quiet down, but they never fully dissipated. The ember of our shared experience remained, quietly glowing in the recesses of my mind. My days were usually filled with the mundane yet gratifying tasks of helping others navigate their own turmoil, ordinary sessions punctuated by the lilting sounds of laughter or the occasional sob spilling forth beneath my watchful, empathetic gaze. However, I'd be lying if I said I didn't occasionally grapple with the strange weight of what I learned from my time with him, the man who carried remnants of war upon his shoulders, whose very name echoed like thunder in the stillness of moral conversation. We had exchanged stories that clung to the air between us, tough tales mottled with blood, but juxtaposed by his stark vulnerability. There was a surreal paradox in the way he navigated his undying guilt, the burden of lives lost and the iron chains of memory that clanked heavily in the quiet confines of our sessions. I knew, deep down, that some might balk at the very concept of treating such a soul. Disillusioned by my commitment, they would see this as a grave misstep driven by an overzealous idealism that turned a blind eye to the darker shades of morality. But for me, it evolved into a personal pilgrimage, peeling away layers to uncover something both terrifying and exquisite hidden within the human experience. Despite his history, I felt a task far greater than indictment rested upon my shoulders. It was about bridges and understanding, and the ache of recognizing that every antagonist could very well be a protagonist spun into the wrong story. The sun dipped low over the horizon in a golden farewell most evenings as I closed up shop, and each time I brushed past that creaky door, my thoughts would inevitably drift to him. That connection had shaped every earnest "how are you feeling?" and the gentle nudges toward progress I offered my clients. His haunting presence was like a ghost that had woven itself into the fabric of my life, an uninvited friend who refused to leave. Then came the day when he slipped back into my life, almost effortlessly, like the first drop of rain after a long drought. The clinic's phone rang with an urgency that promptly shattered my thoughts. I answered, only to hear his gravelly voice across the line, the kind that had once stuttered halting truths, now noticeably aged, echoing with fatigue. "I need to talk again," he said, a tremor in his tone, laden with either desperation or hope, perhaps both. My heart sank at the unease lining his words, a reminder of vulnerability sharper than glass. "Of course," I replied, a practiced calm enveloping my own bubbling uncertainty. "When would you like to come in?" We arranged for the next day, and as I hung up, the familiar anticipation flooded my veins, tangled with strands of anxiety. Despite all he'd shared, I wondered just how far the edges of his redemption could stretch. He arrived the following afternoon, a spectral sight clad in shadows and what felt like an ocean of burdens. We exchanged muted greetings, the weight of past sessions settling around us like an oppressive fog. I offered him a seat, the worn fabric whispering against the chair as he sank into it. His eyes were tired but kept alert, deeply searching as if willing me to see the fragments of a man who had been stripped down to the core. "I can't shake it," he admitted, his voice a raw whisper that sliced through the air. "The faces, the screams, they're all still there. I thought talking would help, but..." His words trailed off, leaving a palpable silence that bloomed between us. It felt familiar, each rhythm of his voice resonating with the resonance of our prior discussions, yet the frailness of his current state drew a stark contrast against the usually firm man before me. "I need a reason to keep going," he finally confessed, his anguish laid bare. It dawned on me then, the forgiveness he sought wasn't merely for himself, it was for the world outside, a world that had spun on without acknowledging the depths of his plight. I paused, crafting my words as carefully as a sculptor chiseling a marble block. "You've been through an unimaginable experience, and it's okay to grieve what you've lost, including parts of yourself." Encouragement was met with a deluge of bottled experiences spilling forth. He spoke of harrowing nights haunted by memories of despair and fleeting moments of humanity amid the devastation. It was an outpouring that spilled out over the juxtaposition of life and death, a hammer striking an already fragile heart. I listened closely, offering comfort and space for him to release his burdens. As he shared, I realized that my mere presence was creating a safe sanctuary for his pain. And in return, he was handing me insights into the complexity of humanity, the darkness intertwined with light, the monster wrapped in flesh yearning for understanding. The session meandered along the delicate threads of healing, and when it ended, a smile tugged at my lips. In that moment, what we found was shared resilience, a pact of empathy forged anew. As he walked out, lighter than when he entered. I felt our connection soothe my spirit. Outside my window, the sun dipped below the jagged edges of the horizon, casting everything in a glow that felt almost like fresh beginnings. Somehow, we had salvaged something vibrant from the depths, two souls crafted in fire, sharing an understanding that transcended mere shame or vilification. I knew then, in the ebbs and flows of life, we all carry shadows, but it's how we embrace the light that becomes the heartbeat of our stories. Months would pass again, but this wound would no longer press against the fabric of my soul. It was simply a reminder that healing takes many forms, and sometimes the bravest act one can perform is choosing to understand. It was early morning when I received the call that stirred distant memories, pulling me back into the realm of what had once felt like a fever dream. The familiar tone of my office phone cut through the stillness, echoing in the small, softly lit space where I often found respite among the flood of paperwork and therapy notes. The voice on the other end introduced itself as someone from the local clinic. A quick review of my ongoing cases had flagged some lingering concerns regarding one particular patient, Roberto. His name alone conjured an inexplicable mix of emotions. The bond we had forged itched at the edges of my consciousness, reminding me of the chaotic intersection of darkness and light that had forever changed how I viewed suffering and redemption. The directive was straightforward: I must assess his mental state again, as his behavior had begun to spiral back into the shadows. Soft murmurs of concern flared as I listened to the details, words like inappropriate outbursts and intense expressiveness wrapping themselves around the narrative of a man who had once been untouchable in my office, an enigma I had been compelled to understand. A part of me, however reluctant, was ready for this renewed confrontation. I held tightly to the memory of those long sessions where we navigated the raw, jagged edges of each other's truths, his tales of war, chillingly layered with nuance, and my responses, steeped in empathy, attempting to thaw the frozen armor he had forged through a lifetime of conflict. I could still picture him leaning forward, almost animated at times, as he recounted snippets from his past, the smell of distant gunfire, the weight of choices that even fate could not preordain. What had once felt like a burden to sift through now shimmered with the fervor of transformation, reshaping how healing could truly take form. I wondered if I could be his guide again, helping him inch back toward the flickering warmth we had discovered together. When I arrived at the small clinic, the air was heavy with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and unshakable tension. The waiting area felt eerily tranquil, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly above as anxious patients clung to the pages of dog-eared self-help books. Roberto sat in the far corner, casting an imperceptible shadow against the walls painted in pastel blues, his hands tight around the frayed edges of his sleeves. Those familiar dark circles encircling his eyes told stories of sleepless nights, of memories refusing to fade. Our eyes met, and within that glance lay everything we had shared, the traumatic echoes of his past and the promise of exploration yet to come. The minute I took my seat across from him, the weight of those shared shadows enveloped us again, as immovable as the gravity of unspoken regret. "Are you all right?" I ventured, noting the slight tremor in his clenched fists. He drew a breath, deeply rooted in unease but tinged with resolve, a mix I had grown to recognize in our sessions. "Sometimes the past just doesn't want to stay behind," he replied, his voice gravelly yet strikingly sweet, like a stone plunged into murky waters, creating ripples of reflection. What followed encapsulated moments that were equal parts heartbreaking and enlightening. Stories tumbled out in jagged snippets, each revealing how the weight of his horrific choices felt heavier still in the light of accountability. As I listened, flashes of recognition flickered within me. All of us, in our own ways, were at war with ourselves, battling regret or shame, yet yearning for connection, a bridge between fractured histories and hope. With each session, I cherished the clarity that arose from our encounters, the understanding that slowly morphed from fear into acceptance, both for Roberto and myself. We weren't separate entities, we were interwoven vessels of experience navigating the escalating tide of emotions that threatened to drown us. He spoke of nights he couldn't close his eyes, of whispered faces that haunted him in fleeting dreams, yet with each confession, a pinprick of healing emerged, connecting us through shared vulnerability. One session melted into another, until bizarrely, the notion of guilt transformed into a raw, electrifying energy, less of an anchor and more of a compass guiding him toward understanding himself, even when he didn't completely believe the journey was justifiable. Months turned into a captivating rhythm of sessions, laden with profound exchanges of love, pain, and redemption. It became clear that he was beginning to redefine his narrative, weaving threads that had only previously been tainted in despair. Finding strength in the light, he learned to speak the truth while bearing that heavy weight, Each session felt like we were peeling back layers of a deeply rooted yet beautiful tapestry. I, too, was unearthing pieces of my own self in the process, questions of morality and humanity grappling within my mind, forging renewed perspectives while allowing empathy to flourish like newfound blossoms in early spring. The day he smiled, truly smiled, was etched like magic in my memory. I want to be better. His words fell like gentle raindrops on parched soil, nourishing the parts of him still yearning for acceptance. I nodded, my heart swelling with pride, for here was a warrior unarmed, wrestling the ghosts of a haunting past. Understanding no longer shackled him but inspired him instead. Yet, just when tranquility seemed to blanket our sessions, whispers of unrest emerged from the clinic, echoing through the hallways about a potential release for Roberto. I found myself at a crossroads, battling anxiety as the thought of him re-entering society and grappling with a world reluctant to embrace those who'd once held the weight of war upon their shoulders tugged at my heartstrings. What if this journey of healing, still so raw, was to be disrupted by a society unwilling to forgive? Each day turned into a nebulous haze where hope and dread revealed themselves as two sides of the same coin. I sought solace in my memories of our progress, yet uncertainty loomed like a storm cloud overhead. When the day finally arrived, and the clinic called me in for one last session before his departure, the room felt electric with unspoken farewells. Roberto emerged quietly, almost reverently, his eyes reflecting an agonizing blend of gratitude and apprehension. As we exchanged the final words, a small part of me clung to the idea that I might see him again, managing to insist on finding connection amid the chaos, willing to embrace the discomfort of disparity. As he stood to leave, our eyes met once more, and I could see it, the light flickering in the depths of his gaze, the will to carry the lessons we had unearthed in the sacred space we'd nurtured. No matter where you go, just remember to seek understanding, I said softly. Theirs was both familiar and alien, intricate tapestries made from war and healing, woven together. Months later, the world beyond the clinic hummed with its relentless rhythm, and I reveled in the quiet strength that silently fortified my practice and life. Healing is indeed a labyrinth, I mused, entwined within shadows and light, and as I reflected on the journey, I realized that sometimes the most painful paths illuminate truths long buried, waiting to re-emerge, the enduring truth that every heart holds the universe of battles fought and emotions shared. Perhaps the real journey lay not solely in the act of healing but in the unwavering spirit that rises, ready to embrace love and connection, even in the wake of madness. It started as a typical Tuesday morning for me, the usual gray light filtering through the half-drawn curtains and the sounds of the neighborhood waking up. I shuffled into the dim kitchen, coffee brewing, thoughts racing ahead of me like they often do. I was just 2 weeks into my new job as a healthcare data analyst, and despite the monotonous tasks, I found myself strangely excited, like this was my first little step into a big, adult world. I had been vying for this position ever since I graduated, earning my degree with the hopes of making a real impact in the world of health services. My enthusiasm, however, took a strange twist when I received a call from my boss that day. He told me there had been a mix-up with patient records at a nearby clinic and that I would need to come in at the end of the day to help fix it. As someone who had always valued personal privacy and the importance of confidentiality, I was unsettled. The notion of accessing sensitive patient files made me shiver, but I shook off the discomfort, reminding myself this was part of my job. Fast forward to the evening, and I entered the clinic, feeling a knot in my stomach. The fluorescent lights above buzzed ominously as I was introduced to the IT team and pointed toward a small room cluttered with outdated computers. That's when I encountered her, Melissa, a nurse who seemed to embody calm in the storm of disarray surrounding us. As we sat together trying to untangle the mess, I tried to keep things lighthearted, joking about the nature of paperwork and technology, but she quickly quieted. "Just remember, HIPAA violations are serious," she said, her voice low and slightly unsteady. That warning took root in my mind, not because I was making any potential mistake but because I sensed something deeper in her tone, a burden she carried. I pressed her about it gently. "You seem stressed, Melissa. Is there something I should know?" She sighed, glancing at the door. "It's not about the patients who've already seen their records. It's about a new patient. You won't believe what happened." I felt a chill run through me as she recounted the tale. A patient, a woman named Sarah, had shown up mysteriously at the clinic requesting her records but had no identity. Melissa said Sarah wore odd clothing, spoke in riddles, and had an unsettling gaze that left the staff feeling watched. I could almost see the tension in her shoulders lighten as she spoke, a shared fear between us. It turned the mundane task of analyzing data into something almost mystical. Hours passed, and we were deep into a discussion of privacy, ethics, and the essence of patient identity when a sharp knock on the door jolted me upright. A man, disheveled and panting, burst in. "You found her, right? You have to find her," he yelled. The room fell silent before I collected my thoughts. Confusion swirled around us. Melissa ushered him outside, but I could hear a harried discussion happening just beyond the walls. It felt like an eruption that I was not meant to witness. When they returned, tension wound tighter than a coiled spring. The man explained, "Sarah is not who she says she is. She doesn't have a history in our files. It's like she's a ghost." He looked feverish, as though he had been chasing shadows. My heart raced. Was the woman we were trying to help someone trapped in a web of secrets? Or was she a danger, cloaked in anonymity? I felt a wave of uncertainty wash over me, but curiosity tugged at my senses too. "What does she want?" I finally asked. The man's eyes darted, fear shadowing his breath. "She wants answers. She thinks someone is after her." We were thrown into chaos. As Melissa and I resumed our tasks, I could feel my pulse quicken at every intimate detail. Data entries felt like interrogations as I plotted course after course through our systems, trying to piece together the answers to the enigma concealed within our sterile walls. The weight of records heavier than I'd anticipated hung over me. I replayed our conversation about HIPAA over and over, ensuring I was not crossing lines I didn't intend to cross, while my mind tangled with each unexplained piece of information. It became an obsession. How could a woman simply not exist? As the sun fell further, shadows began to stretch along the walls, the clinic growing quieter. Eventually, Melissa and I navigated deeper into the records, sensing a shift of urgency as we worked to uncover the truth. When we finally hit pay dirt, an old record buried so deep that no one had bothered to check, it felt like winning a race against the clock. Her name popped up alongside a series of previous appointments and a disconcerting note that detailed an anomalous transfer between facilities. Melissa smiled with relief, but I couldn't shake the discomfort settling over me. I expected every moment to slip into the realm of horror, fearing it might spiral out of control. As we walked the records to our supervisor, I felt a strange pull back toward Sarah, like she was a part of me now. What came next was surprising. Melissa and I both had to face frustrating bureaucracy and laws, trying to make sense of Sarah's identity, the paperwork spinning us around in knots of red tape. Each phone call became a trial, testing the limits of propriety and patience until I was left wondering if we would ever resolve the chaos that had enveloped us. As the clock struck midnight, a decision had to be made, to keep looking and risk breaking rules or accept what we discovered and move on. Taking a breath, I opted for honesty. We approached our supervisor and bared the whole situation, feeling the weight of truth lifting us slightly. What followed were some tense moments I will never forget. My heart raced as the supervisor scrutinized our findings, and I held my breath, praying we hadn't ventured too far. In that moment of clarity, I understood the gravity of our roles, the essence of humanity fused into every record, and how vital it was to respect these lives woven together through the healthcare system. As for Sarah, the answer came swiftly. The right personnel followed up, though I never learned what fate awaited her. I left the clinic that night exhausted yet relieved, acutely aware that the thrill of ethereal mystery and the deeply rooted seriousness of caring for patient identity often clash in the world of healthcare. Months passed after that fateful evening, and the experience began to fade into a soft recollection, just another tale tucked into my mind, woven among the many threads of my career. Then, one quiet Sunday afternoon, I received a familiar message. It was Melissa. "Hey," it read, "you won't believe what I've just found out about Sarah." Curiosity surged through me, and as I read, I couldn't help but wonder if I hadn't just become part of the story of someone who had carved their existence between identities. Just like that, I realized, sometimes those we think are lost may hold secrets worth keeping, and our paths cross not by mere chance, but by a shared understanding of who we are beneath the masks we wear. And so I relayed back, "Tell me everything." Melissa's response came swiftly, like a whisper caught on the wind, full of urgency and intrigue. "I was going through some old social media posts, and it appears Sarah's been leading a double life. Did you know she used to work in a psychiatric hospital? She posted about her experiences under a pseudonym, and there are some pretty intense revelations in there. You should see the comments she gets, people sharing their struggles, their fears, and tying them into her stories in ways that are surprisingly insightful." A chill ran through me. I had known Sarah only as the soft-spoken woman with a penchant for vintage books and herbal teas, never as someone who had grappled with the complexities of mental health in a professional setting. "Do you think she's still in touch with anyone from there?" I texted, my mind racing with a river of thoughts. Would knowing more about her spark some deeper connection? Or was this merely stumbling onto territory better left alone? Melissa replied in a way that made me think she had kicked her own thoughts around, too. Well, I didn't dig that deep, but she mentioned a case in one of her posts. It was cryptically fascinating. You could check if any of her old colleagues are still around. The notion struck me hard. What if this case was pivotal, not only to Sarah's past but perhaps intertwined with her reasons for stepping back from society? Instinctively, I felt a wave of empathy wash over me mixed with a hint of dread. I couldn't help but picture Sarah, clocking in day after day, carrying the weight of another person's pain, while she herself might have been drowning in her own struggles. The next day was a haze of mixed emotions, curiosity mixed with caution. Somewhere within me, a voice cautioned against delving too deep, reminding me of my role as the friend of the storyteller, not the investigator. But I felt that I couldn't just let this mystery slip through my fingers. Before I knew it, I began my search, tracking down various forums where ex-employees shared their experiences. Each thread unraveled new layers, pieces of a puzzle that felt achingly familiar. Eventually, I stumbled across a name that stood out: Dr. Hargrove, Sarah's former supervisor. The reviews of her were a mix of reverence and caution, as people praised her for her intuition but also warned of her unwavering intensity. Feeling daring, I reached out to Dr. Hargrove via LinkedIn, but the message sat unanswered for weeks as I tried to balance my fascination with an uneasy sense that I was intruding on something far more personal than I could understand. Then, almost unexpectedly, the notification popped up, a quick blip that sent adrenaline coursing through me as I read Dr. Hargrove's reply. Let's discuss. How did you come to know Sarah? I paused, contemplating how to respond, businesslike, or friendly and casual, but in the end, emotion tugged at me. I filled my response with the truth, how Sarah had become dear to me over our conversations, artfully circumventing the eerie nature of my inquiry. Soon, we arranged a call. As we spoke, Dr. Hargrove shared fragmented tales of Sarah's time in the ward, illuminating flashes of bravery amidst darker times, illuminating how she had been a fierce advocate for her patients' rights. It felt like I was sitting on a springboard, ready to leap into the unknown depths of Sarah's past, and yet I could hardly breathe as she detailed an incident with a patient that almost garnished Sarah both admiration and ire within the hospital community. She pushed boundaries in ways that rattled some of the staff, the doctor described, her voice steady yet tinged with endearment. She believed in radical empathy, often becoming too emotionally involved in her cases. It led to a very critical incident that forced her to reevaluate her place in the world. My heart raced at the weight of her words. I realized that Sarah held stories that might shatter what I thought I knew of her. They were pieces of her soul woven into those moments, and whether she shared them freely or kept them locked away, they remained an inseparable part of her journey. As the call ended, a lingering question hung in the air: was this knowledge something I should reveal to her, or would it expose vulnerabilities that Sarah had worked hard to conceal? In the following days, my heart grew heavier, crafting narratives in my mind where revealing this truth brought only pain. One night, unable to sleep, I took the plunge. I texted her, my fingers trembling over the screen. "Hey, can we talk? I found out some things about your past." Silence enveloped the air, thick and awkward as I stared at my phone, half hoping for a reply but equally dreading it. When her response finally came, it read simply, "About what?" My pulse quickened. She had a right to know that her reflections had inspired earthquakes in someone else's life. I told her everything, all at once, my heart racing, projecting my excitement while fearing the abrupt end of our connection. It was futile to deny, she was a storyteller in every sense. But Sarah's reply was slower this time, each dot cueing a new pang of anxiety within me. The chat fizzled out, leaving a stuttered beat of anticipation hanging thick in the air. With each passing minute, I replayed every detail, how brave she had been, how compassionate her words were, yet I feared for the memories that the shadows carved into her spirit, one she may not wish to confront. When she finally typed, "I didn't think anyone would ever ask me about that. It has been a while," I felt a tidal wave of relief rush through me. I stepped carefully, acknowledging the fragility housed in her revelation while also wanting to encourage her to share more. We spent hours on the phone after that, her words weaving a tapestry of pain and hope in ways I had never imagined before. I finally grasped the depth of her character. She wasn't lost between the stories and identities, she was the sum of them, an intricate web of experiences that continued to shape her. When our call finished, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, longing to draw her out of the shell that had quietly encased her. It became evident, sometimes, Behind the closed doors of old memories, lies a path to healing, a beckoning for both of us to remind ourselves who we were beyond the masks we created. As the days turned into weeks, we exchanged messages more freely now, her guarded tone melting into something friendly and real. And I wondered, in passing, about what stories I too held tightly behind my own facade, cherished fragments that might intertwine with hers. Perhaps we both shared the weight of pasts and secrets, each of us learning to navigate our truths together, a quiet understanding that some journeys are meant to be shared. And so, in this tangled dance of revelations, Melissa's message came to echo within me. Sometimes those we think are lost hold secrets worth keeping, and who knows? Perhaps in every hidden truth lies the potential for connection greater than we could ever envision. Melissa's response was instant, a flurry of text that felt both electric and weighty. "You know Sarah, right? She worked at that clinic a few months back, the one where you used to go for therapy?" I nodded to myself, even though she couldn't see me. The memories of that clinic were still vivid, the sterile smell of antiseptic mingling with the faint scent of lavender that the receptionist sprinkled in the air. Sarah had been warm, a gentle presence amidst the cold sterility of mental health care. "Well," Melissa continued, "she's been let go. They said it was for violating protocol, but there's more to it." At that moment, curiosity twisted in my gut. Sarah had always seemed so careful, so attuned to the patient's needs. What did she do? I typed back, my fingers trembling slightly as I awaited Melissa's reply. "I ran into her at the bar a week ago," Melissa wrote slowly, "and she was different. More erratic. She mentioned something about patient files, but she didn't elaborate. I think she might have been researching something she shouldn't have. And you know what's wild? She was asking about you." My heart skipped a beat. Why would Sarah be looking into me? Was she worried, or was it something deeper? The butterflies in my stomach fluttered violently as I recalled my last session with Sarah. She'd seemed concerned when I mentioned dreams that felt too real and haunting moments that clung to me like shadows. Was my own world now somehow threading into Sarah's unraveling tale? I let the questions linger as I replied, "What do you mean, asking about me? What did she say?" The pause felt interminable, each second stretching into infinity as I held my breath. Finally, Melissa's words came trickling through, laden with weight. "She seemed concerned about your last diagnosis. She mentioned she was worried you were in more danger than you realized." I felt a chill creep up my spine. My mind raced back to those countless times I had poured my heart into therapy, the honest exchanges that had found a home in Sarah's understanding gaze. Had I inadvertently exposed some hidden secret of my own? The idea that I might be a part of a story much larger than my own made me uneasy. I typed, "Danger? How? I don't understand." But before Melissa could respond, a flood of memories surged within me, the names, the diagnoses, the whispers of HIPAA that seemed to echo through the hallways of every psychiatric facility I had ever stepped foot in. Suddenly, I recalled my own feelings of being trapped, seen yet unseen, always an open book to those with the power to scribble in my pages. In that moment of reflection, I began to wonder if Sarah had realized that perhaps I was more than just another patient, more than just a series of symptoms and treatment plans drafted in the dim light of a therapist's office. Maybe I too had secrets worth sharing, though I had built my own wall to protect them. My thoughts spiraled again as Melissa's follow-up came. "She wanted me to find you and tell you this. She thinks you need to see her, to understand something she uncovered." My mind reeled. Was it reckless to consider meeting with someone who had been fired, someone on the fringes of this clinical world? Yet, a part of me felt the pull towards Sarah, an anchor that called out through the disarray of my thoughts. Maybe she held the key to understanding those hidden fragments of myself I had kept so tightly wrapped. "Where can I find her?" I found myself typing without thought. Melissa replied almost immediately, "I can give you her address, but I don't feel good about this, you know? Be careful." That care rang like a distant bell against the backdrop of my apprehension, and I found comfort in it, a reminder that I wasn't truly alone in this moment. As I read the address, a sense of determination washed over me, mingling with the anxiety that had taken residence in my chest. I could investigate my own narrative. Perhaps, like Sarah, I had been woven into a larger fabric of existence, one that danced between known truths and hidden realities. And so, with every heartbeat echoing my pulsing thoughts, I made up my mind. I needed to meet Sarah, to forge a connection that could shed light on her mysteries and perhaps my own. The sun dipped low in the sky as I prepared myself for the encounter. I felt the shapes of the shadows outside elongate, stretching toward the horizon, much like the threads of fate pulling us together. As I drove toward her address, the scenery blurred by, each mile marked with a question, a longing, an eagerness to embrace whatever awaited me. My mind buzzed like a hive, each curiosity a little bee searching for a flower, unsure of the nectar hidden within. Would I find answers to my own buried truths, or would I unravel the deeper meanings behind Sarah's journey? I parked outside a modest apartment complex that looked both inviting and intimidating, and as I stepped out of the car, a strange calm settled over me, settling the racing thoughts tumbling like jumbled leaves in the wind. I approached her door and raised my hand to knock, my pulse quickening as I fought the urge to turn back. Then, before I could second-guess myself, I knocked. Each sound echoed like a heartbeat against the wood. I stood there, waiting, breath held. It felt as though the world had condensed into this moment. A few moments passed before the door creaked open, revealing Sarah's familiar face, though it seemed altered, marked by worry and disarray. Her eyes flickered with recognition and a hint of relief, as if she had been bracing herself for this moment. "You came," she said softly, and just like that, I stepped over the threshold, into her story, our stories united, as curiosity whispered infinite possibilities of truths yet to be revealed. And as I crossed into her living space, amidst the clutter of papers, stray books on mental health, and empty coffee cups, that sense of connection blossomed, cradled in the realization that perhaps every secret worth keeping leads us not just into shadows, but toward the light of understanding ourselves and one another. It was a crisp autumn evening when I found myself seated on a park bench, the sun dipping low and casting golden hues over the trees, lost in thought as I waited for my friend Sarah. We had grown up together, our lives entwined in a winding road of shared memories, laughter, and even occasional disagreements. One of those disagreements surfaced less than a week ago when Sarah casually mentioned she had rehomed her cat, Luna, because she was moving into a new apartment that didn't allow pets. I remember how my stomach churned at those words, the implications weighing heavy as I fought against the instinct to defend the word or home, a term that felt cold and clinical in this context. To me, it signified a relinquishment of responsibility, a decision that felt too easy for someone who had adored their pet just weeks before. When she arrived, enthusiasm radiated from her as she spoke about her new place, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I had to say something. "Did you really have to rehome her?" I asked, my voice teetering between concern and accusation. Sarah's smile faltered, her eyes flicked away, a flicker of guilt dancing on her features. "Well, I didn't have a choice," she replied defensively, her fingers tracing the fabric of her jacket. It felt like an innocent conversation spiraling into something deeper, an unspoken battle of values. As she continued detailing the space in her new apartment, excitement spilling from her like the leaves falling around us, I wrestled with the weight of my words. Was I being harsh? Was it fair to confront her at that moment, when all she wanted was to share her joy? I could see Luna's big, curious eyes, the way she would curl up in my lap when I visited Sarah, and it just felt wrong. "You could have found someone who could take care of her properly," I said, my voice steadier now, watching for Sarah's response. There was a long silence. Her expression closed off, and for the first time, I felt the distance between us. "You don't get it, do you?" she finally said, a hint of anger creeping into her tone. "I loved her, but I couldn't keep her. I had to think about my life. You know how it is when you're on your own." That was it. My heartbeat pulsed loud in my ears as I processed her admission, my mind rushing through memories of late-night snack raids indulging in comfort food, the unshakable bond that had once brought us close. I was the anchor, and she had seemed so adrift. I wanted the best for her, but at that moment, I felt like I had done the unthinkable. We were friends, yet I had challenged a decision that cut deeper than I realized. After that evening, our communications chilled. She began to post pictures of her new apartment, filled with stylish decor and vibrant colors, each post a reminder of how our lives were heading in different directions. I longed to reach out, to mend the bridge I had burned with my misplaced need to correct. A few weeks later, I decided to invite her over. For coffee. As I poured and we settled into the familiar comfort of my living room, I took a leap. "I'm sorry for how I reacted. It wasn't my place to judge your decisions. I was scared of losing our friendship," she sighed, her defenses lowering. "I didn't mean to shut you out. It just hurt to hear it from you." There was a catharsis in admitting our faults, a moment where we synchronized our emotions, realizing the importance of honesty. As we talked it through, we both learned the value of understanding versus judgment. Maybe I wasn't the asshole, but just a friend trying to navigate a complex emotional landscape. I remember leaving the conversation feeling lighter, wrapped in a new layer of connection with Sarah, imperfect yet honest. In our journey to find common ground, we had stitched together a stronger bond, one that could withstand the challenges of life, including the heartbreak of saying goodbye to a pet. And as autumn slipped into winter, I reflected on how it was all right to feel deeply, to weigh decisions heavily, even when it caused ripples in our relationships. It's not about being right or wrong, sometimes, it's simply about learning to listen. Update: a few months later, Sarah reached out, asking if I could join her for a fundraiser at the local animal shelter. Passion gleamed in her eyes as she spoke about the importance of responsible pet ownership and the struggles of animals in need. "I think it's time I helped make a difference in some way," she said. In that moment, I knew Sarah had turned her experience into motivation, reshaping her heartache into advocacy. As we teamed up to raise awareness together, that initial tension, that moment of conflict, became a stepping stone into something greater, a testament to the resilience of friendship wrapped in understanding and growth. We started planning the fundraiser with a sense of purpose that I hadn't expected. As the days passed, I found myself leaning into this project with all the energy I had, eager to support Sarah in her newfound mission. The community pulled together in a way that was almost magical. Local businesses donated food, prizes, and even some services for the event. It was amazing to see people rally around something so meaningful. The shelter, a small yet bustling space filled with the soulful mews and barks of its inhabitants, became a second home to both Sarah and me. We spent hours making flyers, organizing online donations, and promoting the event on social media. With each post and share, I noticed Sarah's spirits rising significantly. She had transformed from a person who felt the heaviness of her previous decision into a beacon of light for others who were struggling with similar choices. The night before the fundraiser, we sat on the floor of my living room, strewn with papers, colorful decorations, and half-empty takeout containers. The air was alive with excitement, and I couldn't shake the feeling of how much this experience had brought us closer. As we laughed and shared stories about the cats we both cherished and the oddities we had come across at the shelter, I felt a sense of peace settle over us. The weight of that initial argument slowly faded, replaced by shared laughter and dreams of making a real difference. We had both learned from the experience. I was grateful for the way she had opened up about her choices, and she was hopeful about helping others avoid similar pitfalls. The day of the fundraiser dawned bright and sunny, a perfect backdrop for our event. People arrived with smiles, families brought their children, and a few furry friends bounced alongside them. I could see Sarah in her element as she mingled with the crowd, reading to the kids gathered around her, while I handled the donations and set up a photo booth for some adorable pet portraits. We had even arranged for a local animal trainer to give demonstrations. The allure of seeing cute animals working alongside humans drew in a larger crowd than we could have anticipated. I kept glancing at Sarah throughout, marveling at how far she'd come since that difficult conversation. Around mid-afternoon, as we watched people bidding on hours with the dog trainer, I noticed Sarah standing by herself a short distance away, a frown creasing her brow. I approached cautiously. "Hey, you good?" I asked, concerned. I had just seen her shine moments before. She looked up at me, her eyes a mixture of uncertainty and frustration. "I guess I never really thought about how much my choice affected others," she admitted quietly. "I mean, look at all these people. They're here to support a cause. Meanwhile, I felt like I'd let my cat down." Her voice trembled slightly, and I felt a surge of compassion wash over me. It was a moment of raw vulnerability, and I understood that her past choices still haunted her despite her efforts to turn things around. The crowd buzzed in the background, but the world felt still between us. "Sarah," I said softly, "what you did wasn't ideal, but it was part of your journey, and now you're using that to make a difference." I took a moment to gather my thoughts before continuing. "Every person here has made mistakes in one way or another. Your honesty about what happened with your cat has inspired others to take responsibility. You're helping people understand that rehoming doesn't equal giving up. It can be a tough decision with a new beginning waiting on the other side." Her expression shifted slightly as she absorbed my words. "You really think so?" she asked, a hint of hope flickering in her eyes. I nodded, reassuring her with a smile. "I really do. And look around us. You're creating a community of awareness and compassion. That's bigger than just one bad decision." It was as if a dam inside her had broken, releasing the tension she'd held onto for so long, and she smiled, a genuine spark lighting up her features. As the day unfolded, I watched Sarah as she engaged with attendees, sharing stories, and embracing newfound friendships with those passionate about animal welfare. It filled me with warmth to witness her come alive in this atmosphere, where her past hadn't defined her, and her desire to advocate for animals took precedence. We did well that day beyond our expectations. We raised more funds than we could have hoped for and brought awareness to animal welfare like never before. As the sun began to set, and people started to gather their things, Sarah and I took a moment to reflect. We really did it, she sighed, exhaustion lining her voice, but joy danced in her eyes. I felt a wave of pride swell within me as I nodded, the remnants of our earlier disagreement wholly eclipsed by this sense of achievement and camaraderie. It would take time for Sarah to completely forgive herself, and while we both knew the road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges, I was glad she had found purpose again. In the weeks following the event, we continued to volunteer at the shelter, slowly helping build a network of support and fostering hope in our community. I began to realize that even the most painful mistakes could pave the way for healing and understanding. They might be rough avenues, but they often lead us to where we are truly meant to be. With every adoption story we shared, every happy ending we witnessed, I felt grateful to be by Sarah's side, an unexpected partner in this journey towards redemption. Eventually, one evening after a long shift at the shelter, Sarah and I found ourselves just sitting in the quiet, the hum of the night wrapping around us like a comforting blanket. "I think I'm finally at peace with what happened," she whispered, her voice calm and assured. "And it's because of you." I smiled softly, feeling that once tense chapter of our friendship close like a book meeting its last page, knowing well that every ending sparks the light of a new beginning. The lessons embedded within lay the foundation for exploring our own journeys with newfound empathy and strength. As the stars flickered overhead, I marveled at how far we had come together. Gone were the days of tense discussions and misunderstandings, replaced by an unspoken bond forged in shared experiences and common goals. The shelter had become more than just a workplace, it was our sanctuary, a place where laughter spilled over the cages of cats and dogs alike, mingling with the sweet smell of pet food and the warm glow of the overhead lights. Evenings spent sorting donations turned into brainstorming sessions for future campaigns, and I could see the spark of determination in Sarah's eyes, illuminating her path forward. "You know," I said after a gentle pause, "if we keep this up, I think we'll make quite an impact." She chuckled softly, her laugh a melody that drove away the night's chill. The chilly breeze that wafted through the open window felt lovely, a reminder of the world outside, but inside, it felt like we had created our own safe haven, dedicated to ensuring others would find solace just as we had. One day, while wolfing down pizza in the break room, we started discussing the idea of an awareness poster for the fundraiser, describing responsible pet adoption in vivid detail. She suggested we feature personal stories from people who adopted pets from the shelter. I thought it was brilliant and couldn't help but share my own experience, how I had adopted my cat, Luna, who had been found roaming the streets, frightened and alone. The pure joy on her face as she listened reminded me how storytelling could bridge gaps, fostering connection and understanding amongst us. Every new idea swirled in the air like the sweet aroma of the pepperoni pie resting between us. The potential felt palpable. It dawned on me, as laughter echoed off the walls, that these projects were transforming both Sarah and me, aiding us in our journeys of growth, hers from overcoming loss, and mine from learning to advocate fiercely for those who couldn't speak for themselves. As the day of the fundraiser approached, an air of excitement hung around us, and so did the nervous anticipation. We prepared for an influx of community members at the shelter, hoping to raise funds and awareness. With the event looming closer, however, the reality of putting ourselves out there made my stomach flutter. What if I stumbled over my words? What if no one showed up? Every worry was a small cloud in the bright sky of possibility, and Sarah seemed to sense my anxiety, offering reassuring smiles and gentle pats on the back as we honed our message. "We're just sharing our love for animals," she'd remind me, her strength palpable as she navigated her own hesitations. Her calm radiance became my anchor, and slowly, I realized that our paths intertwined not just in friendship but in the mission we shared. On the day of the fundraiser, the shelter vibrated with life and energy, various booths filled with animals looking for homes, volunteers bustling, and the intimate chatter of community filled the air. As people poured into the building, I felt a swell of pride. We had worked hard for this moment, igniting conversations about responsible pet care and the responsibilities that came with adopting. I was surprised when Sarah took her place behind the mic, addressing the crowd with vulnerability and strength. She spoke of the harsh realities within the world of animal welfare, but her voice trembled with passion and love, speaking about how significant it was to choose patience over impulse when it came to rehoming pets. It struck me then, witnessing the audience captivated by her story, that our paths were not merely parallel but actually woven together in a tapestry of understanding, compassion, and collective effort. Later that evening, As the last of the guests trickled out and the leftover pizza grew cold on the table, we took a moment to revel in our success, counting the donations and smiling at the progress we made. I used to feel so lost, you know? Sarah admitted, her brows furrowed slightly. But talking about my experience, sharing it with others, it's like a weight lifted. I nodded, knowing exactly what she meant. In that moment, something inside me shifted. I realized that this journey had not only been about healing for her but also a restorative experience for me too. Having pushed my insecurities aside to advocate for animals had carved out a stronger version of myself, one unafraid to speak up for what mattered. Eventually, as we started to clean up, I could feel the warmth of possibilities ahead. Perhaps it was more than just a fundraiser, it had become a heartfelt rallying call for the community on behalf of those animals still waiting for their forever homes. Months later, Sarah and I would still reminisce about that day, but more importantly, we continued to press on, reaching toward other endeavors that would help better our connection to animals in need. As we expanded our projects, I often thought of that original conflict, a simple miscommunication that had evolved into something profoundly transformative. A reminder that with understanding and time, even the deepest wounds could become a wellspring of strength and new beginnings, each day unfolding a little more like a gentle unfurling of a leaf in spring. It wasn't until a chilly autumn day months later when Sarah called with a breathless excitement. "You need to come over. There's someone here who needs a friend." Curious and slightly amused, I hurried over, only to find her nursing another stray she had taken in, a timid kitten with soulful eyes peering up at me. In that moment, surrounded by warmth and laughter, I knew that although there would always be challenges ahead, Sarah and I had learned how to navigate our way through life's twists and turns, one heartfelt story at a time. And perhaps, from one rehomed cat to another, we had both discovered that every end could lead to a new beginning, forging deeper connections in the heart of it all. It all began one breezy afternoon, the golden light softly washing over my living room as I contemplated the simple yet profound rules that shaped my family dynamics, rules I had never quite realized would lead me down a rabbit hole of conflict and introspection. I had always treasured the close bond we had with my mother, a relationship built on love, memories, and the occasional clash of strong wills. But one evening, as my 8-year-old daughter, Alice, casually referred to my mother as honey during dinner, I felt a jolt, a dislocation of sorts within my heart. To most, this would seem harmless, a term of endearment seamlessly woven into the fabric of family life. To me, however, it opened a floodgate of unresolved emotions. I grew up witnessing my mother's complicated lifestyle, riddled with bouts of neglect and fierce independence that often made her more of a friend than a caregiver. I never questioned the absence of authority in her role, and yet, hearing Alice call her honey felt like an invitation to intimacy that my mother had not earned, a privilege I feared she would abuse. As the days rolled on, I wrestled silently with my feelings, peering into the depths of my mother's approval-seeking behavior, a pattern that had burned me time and again. I decided it was time to set boundaries that would shield my children from the unpredictability of her affection, and so I told Alice, "Sweetheart, it's not okay to call Grandma honey. Her name is Grandma." For Alice's naturally curious and sensitive nature, this prompt seemed a perplexing riddle. Her eyes brimmed with confusion, and I instantly felt a twinge of guilt. Yet I knew this was one of the only ways I could protect my children from the emotional instability that lurked beneath my mother's charming exterior. I imagined possible scenarios, Alice running to her honey for comfort, only to have those sweet moments twisted into half-hearted fits of affection that would leave her confused and wounded. That alone rearranged the pieces of my heart as I guided my daughter to navigate relationships with care. Yet, my gentle restrictions, which I viewed as necessary, did not sit well with my mother. She confronted me during one of our weekly calls, her usually warm voice growing strident as I could tell her feelings were hurt. "Why can't my grandchildren call me what they want?" she asked, her emotional undertones thickening the air between us. I felt compelled to defend my position, explaining that I wanted to maintain clear boundaries for their well-being, citing a few painful memories from my childhood that felt necessary to share. Instead of understanding, however, my revelations only fueled her resentment, breeding a kind of animosity that I had hoped to avoid. "You think you're protecting them," she snapped, "but all you're doing is pushing me away." Caught in that tsunami of emotions, the guilt over distancing my children from their grandmother and the insistence on maintaining their mental health, I found myself questioning whether I truly was the villain in this tale. Days passed, with tension hanging palpably in the air, until, one evening, my husband offered insight that struck a nerve. "You're just creating a cycle," he said softly, prompting a cascade of realizations. In my zeal to protect my children, I had inadvertently mirrored my mother's behaviors, shutting her out just as she once shut me out. As the weeks rolled into months, I let go of my rigid stance and, with a mixture of trepidation and hope, confronted my mother once more. We met in a local cafe, a place where we could relay the unspoken words over warm cups of coffee. I took a breath, recognizing the fragility of our interaction, and nervously explained, "I want to share this love with my children but fear for their emotional health." To my surprise, she opened up, acknowledging her past mistakes, and in that moment of vulnerability, I could see her as a flawed human being rather than the formidable figure I had cast her as for so long. We talked for 3 hours, our words weaving a new understanding among the crisscross threads of hurt and love. By the time we left that cafe, we made a gentle pact. My children could call her whatever felt right, but curiosity would remain the guide. If my mother's affection strayed into chaos, I would be there to help them navigate through the tumult, lifting them back onto their feet when the light dimmed. It was a delicate balance, but so long as we kept communication coherent, there was a glimmer of hope for a new chapter. Months later, my kids call her Grandma, Honey, and sometimes even Grandma Honey on whimsical days. It brings a smile to my face, a small triumph of compromise over conflict. Reflection has carved deeper insights into my soul, and if I've learned anything from this saga of boundaries, it's that relationships thrive where understanding flourishes, even from the pains of our past. As I gaze at my mother with a heart filled with tenderness rather than resentment, I remind myself that although nobody is perfect, the love we share can still bridge the gaping chasms left behind by misunderstandings. I've become the guardian of my children's choices, but in opening the door just a crack, I've also invited my mother into a more stable chapter of our lives, one where love doesn't have to be earned or lost, only shared. Our evenings began to take on a new rhythm, one where laughter resonated through our home in a different way. The clinking of dinner plates mingled with soft conversations, and during those times, I watched my mother transform before my eyes. The rigid demeanor she wore like a shield slowly melted away, revealing glimpses of the woman I remembered from my childhood, the one who would spin fantastical tales of her youth and make blueberry pancakes on Saturday mornings. Each time my children called her Honey, it felt like they were shaping their own relationship with her, possibly one built on affection rather than the fraught history I had held onto for so long. I began to understand that the term didn't erase the years of disappointment, rather, it was a step toward redefining connection, an invitation for both my mother and my kids to forge a bond that could empower them all. It wasn't easy. I still felt pangs of concern whenever my mother slipped into old habits, her sharp tongue ready to cut down any misstep with a quip that could sting. One evening, as my daughter, Lily, baked cookies with my mother, I caught a glimpse of their interaction from the kitchen doorway. My mother had an apron tied around her waist, flour dusting her cheek as she helped Lily roll out the dough. They giggled so genuinely that it made my heart swell, but almost immediately, a familiar icy apprehension chilled my joy. Had I truly invited someone who had disappointed me in the past into my children's sacred spaces? But as I sat watching, I realized that this was my mother trying to change, to fit into a narrative that no longer centered on her past failures but on the potential for love and acceptance. That realization sparked something in me, an acceptance that some relationships are worth bending rules for. Gradually, I found myself loosening the tight grip I had on my judgment, allowing myself to witness moments that reminded me of the shared humanity between us. One rainy Saturday, my mother and I sat on the porch while the kids splashed in puddles, the sound of their laughter muffled by the patter of raindrops on the roof. We exchanged small talk, and when I brought up her choices in the past, she surprised me with an unexpected openness. "I know I messed up," she said softly, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "I didn't have the tools or the knowledge then. I want to learn, not just for myself, but for them. For you." I was taken aback. The recognition of her shortcomings was something I had longed to hear, yet it felt surreal to finally take a step together in something resembling vulnerability. There was no dramatic confession, just a genuine attempt to connect over our shared history. I felt a lightness in my chest, a whisper of hope that perhaps we could build something stronger together. A week later, while we picnicked in the park, Lily climbed into my mother's lap, looking up at her with awe. "Honey," she called sweetly, "can you tell us about the time you met the runaway dog?" My mother's eyes sparkled at the thought, and as she started to weave a story filled with charm and whimsy, I noticed the children were completely engaged, hanging on to each word and all the playful embellishments. For the first time in so long, I didn't feel the urge to guard the children from their grandmother. I realized I was letting go of the fear that had gripped my heart for years. I smiled, absorbing the moment, where laughter echoed through trees swaying gently in the summer breeze, and I began to see the foundation of a relationship being built. Right before my eyes. It was with a sense of cautious optimism that I concluded this journey. The path to evolving our relationship was not without bumps. We often still navigated through the minefield of miscommunication and unspoken grievances. Nevertheless, I held on to the belief that building trust took time and that love could flourish amongst the fragile roots of our shared past. Days turned into weeks, and the more I witnessed my children's genuine affection for my mother, the deeper my resolve grew to encourage it. Sure, we faced setbacks along the way, old habits die hard, and sometimes my mother would slip back into sarcasm or dismissive remarks. But I could intervene, guiding her tone or redirecting the emphasis in our conversations without that ever-present burden of guilt. As the seasons shifted, so did our family dynamic. Thanksgiving rolled around, and as we gathered around the table, Lily took it upon herself to have everyone share what they were thankful for. When it was my mother's turn, she looked at the room full of grateful eyes, and with a quivering voice, she said, "I'm thankful for second chances, for a family that could forgive and, more importantly, for the love that connects us even when we have the past whispering in our ears." In that moment, my heart swelled, a quiet comfort settling in, as I recognized that perhaps the new chapter we were all seeking wasn't just about rebuilding what was lost but also about discovering new facets of each other. Watching my children engaging with their grandmother, embracing her as honey, taught me that healing takes time and that love is a tapestry woven from acceptance and understanding. I realized I'd become less the guardian of their choices and more a nurturer of their relationships, guiding them through the fragile landscapes of familial dynamics with newfound wisdom. And as I reflected on the journey we shared, smiling at the laughter resonating between the walls of our home, I felt a sense of peace. Healing and connections are not linear paths, they are messy, intricate, and absolutely worth every twist and turn. In the months following, we continued to foster this merging of families, keeping communication open and embracing one another's imperfections. Life hadn't magically transformed overnight, but we had discovered ways to create a rhythm that celebrated our unique individualities. I dared to believe that, while relationships are complex, they are also transformative. Each time I caught my children calling my mother honey, I would smile softly, knowing that they are building bridges that I had once thought irreparable. In doing so, we were not just healing old wounds but laying the groundwork for a beautifully intricate tapestry of love that could stretch across generations. As we moved further into this new chapter, I watched my children blossom in the forgiving warmth of their grandmother's embrace. It was a subtly beautiful transformation. At times, I would overhear them whispering secrets to her, their laughter mingling with the rustling leaves outside our window, painting a picture that felt rich and vibrant. It was a far cry from the tense atmosphere we used to have, filled with unspoken words and unresolved feelings. Instead, there was a lightness in the air, a tangible ease that swept through our home like a gentle breeze. My mother began to impress upon them the same stories that once wove the fabric of my own childhood, tales of adventure and mischief shared with my siblings that transformed even the simplest moments into cherished memories. I could see it in her eyes. Each mention of honey from my kids was a reminder that she could still be a good grandmother, that love could be expressed in many ways, and that forgiveness was not the absence of past hurts but the acceptance of them. It wasn't without its awkward moments, of course. There were times when I couldn't help but wince, memories of her difficult past rushing back like an unwelcome tide. But then I would remind myself that everyone is just a story waiting to be rewritten, and change, however small, deserves to be celebrated, even if it takes time to feel whole. One particularly serene afternoon, we gather in the living room, the sun pouring warmth through the windows, casting a golden hue on the walls. My children are sprawled on the floor, building a tower of blocks that seems to teeter precariously, while my mother sits nearby sipping her tea, her laughter ringing like the clinking of wind chimes. I glance at her, noticing how gently she guides their hands, offering suggestions instead of commands. "If we put this one here," she says with a smile, "it's going to topple less." I remember how, in my youth, her words often felt heavy, but now they dance lightly around the room, filled with affection. In that moment, I see the lessons unfolding, the ways in which they are teaching her patience just as much as she is teaching them about creativity and balance. It dawned on me that this new dynamic wasn't solely an opportunity for my children to connect with their grandmother but was healing me too, reshaping the broken pieces of our relationship into something sturdy and dependable. I allowed myself to breathe deeply, relishing the moment, when suddenly my daughter, engrossed in her building project, turned to my mother and casually said, "Hey, honey, can you help?" The word slipped out with the familiarity of an everyday phrase, and I could see the way my mother's eyes sparkled with joy, startled and delighted all at once. There was no hesitation in her smile, it was genuine and pure. "Of course, sweetheart," she replied, scooting closer to help. A warmth unfurled inside me, and for the first time, I didn't flinch on hearing that name float from their lips. Instead, I recognized it as a marker of progress, a gentle reminder that my mother was patching the wounds of her past, stitching herself into our lives, and that I was finally letting go of some of mine. As days turned into weeks, I found that the small things began to shift. Our collective laughter echoed more freely, the unturned corner of my maternal heart felt lighter, and those earlier fears that had once held me captive began to dissolve like mist under the sun. I watched my mother slip more easily into her role, her hesitations fading with each visit. The kids grew more confident in their affection, using names of endearment that bounced off the walls and wrapped around us like a favorite blanket. Each honey became a reverberation of love and an acceptance that we were all imperfect in our ways, doing our best to stitch together the tapestry we called family. There was no grand epiphany, no fixed moment that illustrated our triumph, but rather the quiet realization that connection can flicker ignited even in seemingly insurmountable darkness through small acts of love and openness. As well as the growing comfort of understanding our shared journey, it was in these moments, simple yet profound, that I learned we had become a constellation, each star a unique point of light, interconnected by a shared history and new aspirations. And as I tucked my children into bed that night, their giggles still swirling in the air, I knew that we had turned a page in our story, one full of potential, ready to explore what it means to be a family in the truest sense. I whispered, "Good night, my loves," and as they snuggled deeper into their blankets, I couldn't help but smile, feeling the threads of our tapestry weave tighter around my heart. I closed the door softly behind me, letting the echoes of their laughter linger in the hallway, and for the first time in a long time, I felt an all-encompassing peace settle over me, a delightful realization that in the end, love always finds a way to triumph over pain.